Good afternoon. My name's Beth Monaghan, and I'm a lot of things. I'm a CEO, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a writer, I'm a board member. In fact, I'm so many things that I often have to answer the question, how do you do it all? That's always delivered to me as a deep compliment, and I take it that way, but it frustrates me. And I guess it's better than some of the other questions I've been asked. Questions like, when I got a new car a couple of years ago, my neighbor asked me if I won the lottery, as if that's the only way I could get a new car. 5 years into founding InkHouse, I was pregnant with my second daughter, and I frequently had to answer the question, do you think you're going to come back to work after you have the baby? That struck me strange, and I came up with a joke because it felt better than being rude, and I would just say, oh, well, InkHouse was my first baby. Of course I'm coming back. But the reason these questions frustrate me is because they belie this undercurrent of doubt and bias that women face in the workplace. We have this collective disbelief that women can actually have a good personal life, be a mother, and own a company at the same time, or even just have academic achievement at the same time. And so I get frustrated when I have to answer those questions because they create self-doubt for women too. You know, I learned in college that women won the fight for equality back in the 1960s. So when I graduated and I faced that doubt, I internalized it and I thought that maybe I just wasn't good enough. When I started my company, I had to quit my real job, and I spent the morning dry heaving into the trash can because I didn't have the confidence. I didn't think that I was capable of having this company, which today is 85 employees with offices on 2 coasts. But I did it. And that day I had to borrow my dad's confidence. He was like, hey, you can do it. Just go back in there and quit. So luckily I trusted him. But if we understand that doubt and bias exist, it's easier to overcome. So give me just 60 seconds and let's review the facts. Today, women earn just 79 cents to every man's dollar. Only 4% of S&P 500 CEOs are women. The Equal Rights Amendment was passed in 1972, and it still isn't ratified. Women graduate from college with more ambition than men, but it drops 60% after just 2 years, and it remains steady for men. When women move into occupations traditionally dominated by men, those jobs start paying less. And at this rate, it's going to be 2133 before we close that global pay gap. Now, it's easy to feel defeated in the face of all of this data, and we have so much work to do on the political side and on the cultural side to close that doubt and to help women achieve at the rates that they should be. But I think that there's something we can do now, and it's what I'm calling leaving the ladder down. If you're like me, when I climbed that corporate ladder, I felt like it was the first time anyone had ever climbed it. I didn't have any good examples of other women who'd done it. And so when we do that, we kind of get this emotional attachment to the hard way, like, wow, I did it the hard way, so everybody else should too. But we don't have to. In fact, my suggestion is that if we help other people, overcome the hard things that we had to do and pull them up those ladders with us, perhaps we can close that gap a little bit more quickly. So let me give you 5 of the rungs that I climbed the hard way. 1, I think we should ditch multitasking. It's become our way of life, and it's easy to do that. When I was an entrepreneur and a new mom, I felt like, wow, the solution here should just be, I'll just do everything all the time and that will solve the problem. And, it worked for a little while, and I was running around half crazy. And on one of those crazy days, my daughter was homesick and I was working from home, and she was feeling better, so we went to the park. And I was tapping out emails on my phone, and she was coming down a slide, and I was waiting for her at the bottom. And I felt her feet hit my legs, which made me look up. And she was beaming at me, wishing that I had seen what she had done. And then I looked at the email that I sent, and it absolutely made no sense. And I realized that I wasn't at the park, and I wasn't at work. I was doing both of my jobs badly. So I decided to create some rules. I decided to put my phone down between 5:30 and 7:30 at night, and I decided to turn my email off sometimes on the weekends. I would just check it on my laptop, so I was a little bit more intentional about my focus. And a weird thing happened when I did that. Of course, I became a better mom, but I also got a lot better at my job because I found that distance, that kind of perspective that you need to be really creative and to bring a new lens to your work. And so, as it turns out, I was onto something because as Daniel Goleman wrote in his book, Focus, multitasking is a myth. The mind cannot hold more than one thing at a time in what's called working memory. So if we choose to focus, we can do everything better. Rung 2. Don't apologize. I think I've apologized for just about everything I've ever done. Once I apologized to a client because he sent me an email and he forgot to attach the file. I know, it's silly. And it's easy to do. I think women do that to kind of smooth the waters once in a while. But around the time I was thinking about how to manage work and life and family, I had lunch with a woman named Diane Hessen. Today she runs the Startup Institute here in Boston, and she founded a company called Communispace. And she spent the whole lunch telling me that I should stop apologizing. She said that she stopped apologizing to her children when she went on business trips because she wanted them to aspire to do the same thing. So she gave me permission that day to stop apologizing for all sorts of other things. Things like when a client didn't agree with one of my ideas in a meeting, or even in another setting when a prospective client didn't like the fact that we had square business cards. You know, I would have apologized for those things in the past, and it's absurd to do that. But in that second meeting with the business card example, I paused, and instead of apologizing because he didn't like my cards, I looked at him and I said, well, I can't force you to work with us. And he laughed, and then he hired us anyway. So my point here is that when you learn to trust yourself and to be confident about it, you gain a lot more respect. Because it's a good rule in life never to apologize. The right sort of people do not want apologies, and the wrong sort take a mean advantage of them. We only have to apologize for the things that we do wrong. Rung 3, learn how to say no. This one's tricky. It's hard because we live in this culture that makes us feel really important the busier we are. You know, how many emails do you get every day? The more you get, the more important you are. And we like to complain about it, but we're also kind of trying to show how great we are and how in need we are. And then we complain because there's no time to figure out how to fit that thing that really means something to us into our calendar. So my friend Maya Heyman, who runs an angel fund here in Boston called Common Angels, helped me with this idea. And one night I was having a dinner party and she rushed in. We were kind of all rushing in and we were late. And I looked at her and I said, hey, Maya, how's it going? And she said, you know, I'm trying to focus on fullness instead of busyness. And that really hit home for me because it means that if we focus on the things that fill us up, instead of the things that make us feel frantic, we can do all of the things that mean the most to us. I know that seems almost impossible. Like, how do we decide what to say no to? And Maya gave me another tip. She told me that if we know our goals, if we understand what's important to us, it's easier to say no. So I started writing down my goals, 3 personal and 3 professional at the beginning of every year. And you don't have to wait till January. Today is as good a day as any. But it makes it so much easier for me to say yes to the things that matter and no to the things that don't. Like this year, I said yes to writing a book, so I decided to stop watching TV, and I don't miss it. I say yes to the things that help me grow my business. I go to those meetings with prospective clients. I go to the places where I can recruit great employees. But I say no to lots of evening events because I have 2 children and a husband, and I need to be with them, so I try to limit my evening work events to 1 a week. There's a whole book about how to say no. It's called Essentialism. And so if you don't have your goals and you're in the middle of some big thing and you're not sure if you should do it, the author has some great advice. If the answer isn't a definite yes, it should be a no. Don't convince yourself to say yes. Number 4. Rung 4 is find your people. Now, I know I just finished telling you to say no to everything, but this is the thing you need to say yes to. If you look at the research about happiness, the number 1 predictor of happiness is the quality of your social relationships. And so it's easy if you have a new job, we just heard about that, and you're working around the clock to prove yourself, or you're working around the clock to get your studies done, Or you're an entrepreneur and you have kids. You feel like, wow, I have no time to do anything but just get through the day. And when I was early in the beginning of InkHouse, I felt lonely all the time. I would come home to my husband, Patrick, and I would say, well, where are the women who are just like me? I didn't know anyone who had done what I did or who knew how I felt. But then I looked up one day and I realized that they were all around me and I'd been meeting them. I just needed to pull them into a community. So I did. I got this idea to invite a bunch of them over for dinner at my house. And this was a crazy idea because they were all a lot more accomplished than I was. And I was pretty sure they'd all say no. So I spent a whole morning trying to convince myself to push send on that email invitation. But I'm glad I did because they all said yes. So I invited them to my house and I asked them to bring the answer to one question, which was this: what is the biggest problem you are facing right now? And then the day of, I was still nervous. I mean, what if these people all hated each other? And what if they bring silly problems like, how do I get my business cards printed? But they didn't. They sat down at that table, and the first woman gave a really big and honest answer, and everybody else followed. I've been doing these dinners for 2 years now, and every time I ask a different question. And every time I've realized that if you ask an honest and open question, people give honest and open answers. And now the group has become the place where we go when we need support negotiating salary increases, asking for paid maternity leave, standing up to bullies at work, and it's really easy to replicate. I'm happy to share my whole list of questions, so just message me on Twitter if you want them. And the last rung here is be brave. Bravery is a hard thing when you're fighting with the confidence thing I talked about and all that doubt, because it means you have to overcome your fear. And if you're like me, I've spent a lot of time getting good ideas that I second guess, and I only think they're good ideas when I ask 20 other smart people around me if they think they're good ideas, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should do this. I got jolted out of that one day a couple of years ago. Not by choice. I'd been appointed to sit on a task force that was going to study women's equality in the workplace here in Massachusetts. I was appointed by then Governor Deval Patrick. And the task force was kicking off the next day. And I was at home again with a sick kid. And around 1 o'clock, his communications director, Jessie Mermel, called me. And she said, hey, do you want to come speak on stage with the governor tomorrow? You're going to be one of 5 women who we'd like for you to talk about your experience being a woman in the workplace. So I said yes, because that's really the only answer you can give when the governor asks you to come talk. And then I hung up and started panicking. I mean, I wasn't going to be able to show anybody my speech. I had to write it first, then I had to practice it. And so I wrote it. I wrote about confidence. I wrote about that dry heaving when I quit my job and how I had to learn to overcome my fear and be confident. And I practiced it like 30 times with my husband. Thank you, Patrick. But then I had to decide that my words were going to be good enough and that I didn't need anybody else to tell me that. So I showed up the next morning, and I was sitting on stage, and I was going to be the last person to speak before the governor. And as I sat there and listened to these other women who were so accomplished, and their words were insightful, they were smart, they were funny, I realized something about mine, which was that they were also relevant and that they were different. And it was the first time in my life that I gained the confidence to speak from my heart and to trust my words. When I sat down, Rachel Caprillion, who was the Secretary of Labor at the time, stood up to introduce the governor. And before she did it, she said, well, you know what they say, it's not brave if you're not scared. And then when I got up to leave, there was a line of women waiting to talk to me. And the one I remember the most was an 80-year-old woman who said, wow, I wish someone had said those things to me when I was first starting my career. And it reminds me about the whole point of bravery, which is this. Bravery is always more intelligent than fear, since it is built on the foundation of what one knows about oneself. If we can overcome fear and be brave, then we can trust our guts and know what we are capable of doing. So I'll leave you with this. You're going to climb your ladders the hard way. And I hope you'll find the vulnerability and the courage to leave them down, because there's a ton of people who could use them when you're done. Thank you.